My name is Elena, and I have always believed that the truth is best weaponized, not mourned. The night I discovered my husband's betrayal was not cinematic, not stormy or loud. It was clinical. He left his phone on the marble counter of our kitchen in our Lincoln Park townhouse. The screen lit up, flashing with the kind of arrogance only a man who thinks he is untouchable could possess. A photo appeared, Daniel, my husband of 7 years, with a blonde woman leaning too close to him at the velvet lounge. His hand rested on her thigh. The message beneath the photo read, "She'll never suspect." Elena's too cold to notice. I did not gasp. I did not cry. I sat down in the high-backed chair by the window and stared at the phone for 47 minutes, a number that etched itself into my mind like evidence tagged in a courtroom. 47 minutes of silence, calculation, and clarity. Daniel had underestimated me. That was his first mistake. The second was underestimating us. I pressed the phone face down and called only one person. My identical twin sister, Izzy. Izzy arrived within the hour, her presence a storm contained in human form. Where I was precision, she was chaos. Where I built arguments, she broke them down with a laugh. She had promised me when we were children, sitting on the cracked steps of our father's house in Evanston, that no one would ever hurt me without answering to her. When I told her about Daniel, his affair, his cruelty, his words, she didn't look surprised. She leaned back in the leather chair across from me, a slow grin cutting through the tension. "So," she said, her tone sharp as glass, "do we burn him quietly, or do we burn him so the city sees the flames?" It was then that I realized what I wanted was not revenge in the way most women imagined it. I didn't want to scream, to throw plates, to claw at his face. I wanted him undone, rewritten. I wanted him to become a cautionary tale whispered in Chicago boardrooms and charity galas. Izzy's eyes glittered. "Then let's make him a story no one forgets." The pact was born. We sat together that night drafting the outline of his destruction, like lawyers drafting a case brief. Every man has a weakness. Daniel's was his ego. His need to be admired, to be wanted, to be seen as the cleverest man in the room. That arrogance would be his undoing. Izzy leaned forward, her tone conspiratorial. "Tell me everything. His schedule. His whiskey of choice. His passwords, if you know them. Mother's maiden name. The things he brags about when he drinks too much." I answered each question methodically, supplying details like exhibits in a trial. She wrote them down in a red leather notebook, the same one she had carried since college. By the time we were finished, Daniel's portrait was complete, not as my husband, but as a target. We did not call it revenge. We called it strategy. I remember watching Izzy as she closed the notebook and slipped it into her bag. She looked so much like me, same sharp cheekbones, same dark eyes, but where mine reflected control, hers burned with anticipation. She lived for this, the game, the seduction, the unraveling. "Elena," she said softly, almost tenderly, "he thinks he's playing you. But by the time I'm done, he'll never know who's holding the cards." I nodded once. Cold. Final. The city outside our window glittered with false light, the towers of downtown Chicago rising like monuments to power and greed. Somewhere in those towers, men like Daniel thought themselves untouchable. They thought wives were oblivious, predictable, bound by emotion. They thought twins were just a parlor trick. They were wrong. That night, as the clock passed midnight, I set aside the last shred of sentiment I had for Daniel. He was no longer my husband. He was a case file, a defendant waiting to be tried. And Izzy? She was my co-counsel, my weapon, my shadow. The betrayal was his. The pact was ours. The plan would begin with seduction, a carefully staged chance encounter that would lure him into Izzy's orbit. He would believe he was hunting her, when in reality, every step would bring him closer to the snare we had built. I thought of the blonde in the photograph, her manicured hand on his thigh. She was nothing more than a footnote in Daniel's arrogance. He would discard her soon enough. Men like him always did. But Izzy would be unforgettable. I closed my eyes that night and allowed myself one final indulgence, imagining the look on Daniel's face when he realized it had all been a performance. Every word, every smile, Every stolen kiss, curated, scripted, weaponized. He would never see it coming. When dawn broke over Chicago, I was already awake, sipping black coffee at the kitchen counter. Daniel walked in, adjusting his tie, oblivious. He kissed my cheek with the same mouth that had whispered to his mistress the night before. I felt nothing. The game had already begun. And I never lose. Izzy always said seduction wasn't about beauty, it was about precision. You didn't need to be the most attractive woman in the room. You just needed to be the one who knew exactly what the man in front of you wanted. Daniel had always fancied himself a connoisseur of women. He liked to believe he chose them, that he hunted them, that their admiration was his reward. What he didn't realize was that he was remarkably easy to read. His tastes were predictable, his fantasies embarrassingly ordinary. Izzy understood that from the very first page of her red leather notebook. The plan unfolded at the Ivy Room, a high-end lounge tucked into River North, one of Daniel's regular haunts. I had seen the charges on our joint credit card statements countless times, overpriced whiskey, charcuterie boards he never finished, his attempt at playing the insider among Chicago's self-proclaimed elites. That night, Izzy walked in, not as my sister, but as a character meticulously built from Daniel's blind spots. She wore a midnight green dress that skimmed her figure, understated but deliberate. Her hair fell loose, with just enough mess to appear uncalculated. In her hand was a copy of the Wall Street Journal, folded open to the finance section. She looked like the kind of woman Daniel dreamed of, intelligent enough to challenge him, vulnerable enough to admire him. I wasn't there in person. My role was different. From my office, I listened through the tiny mic hidden in the clasp of her necklace, the audio streaming directly into my laptop. It was almost comical how familiar this felt. I had conducted depositions in quieter rooms, interrogated witnesses with less certainty. Tonight, the defendant was my husband. The bartender set down Daniel's usual order, Lagavulin, neat, before he even asked. Predictable. Izzy waited 3 minutes, exactly as we'd rehearsed, before looking up from her paper and feigning surprise. "You drink Lagavulin?" she asked, her tone casual, almost admiring. "Most men in this city order Macallan. Too sweet for me." His ego inflated immediately. "You know your whiskey." She smiled, a small curve of her lips. "My father used to say you can tell a man's character by his drink." She paused, let the silence breathe. "What does yours say about you?" "Hook. Line. Sinker." I could hear the smugness in his voice as he answered. "That I'm not like other men." Izzy laughed lightly, the sound carefully measured, never too eager. "Good." I was starting to think the city was nothing but clones in tailored suits. From that moment, Daniel was locked in. He leaned closer, feeding on her attention. He bragged about his firm, his deals, his trips to New York. Izzy listened with an expression of fascination, the kind I used to wear during our early years of marriage, before I realized every story was recycled. Through my headset, I heard every word, every arrogant boast. My fingers tapped the desk in rhythm with his lies, cataloging them like exhibits for trial. The first test came quickly. Izzy reached for his hand, brushing against his wedding ring. She tilted her head, her voice soft. "Married?" Daniel hesitated only long enough to sip his drink. Then came the betrayal I had predicted. "It's complicated." My pulse did not spike. I felt no pain, no grief. Only confirmation. Another exhibit added to the file. Izzy played her part perfectly, pulling back just slightly, as if torn. "Complicated how?" He leaned in further, lowering his voice. "She doesn't understand me. She's cold. We don't connect anymore." I almost smiled at the irony. Cold? Perhaps. But cold wins wars. Izzy excused herself after an hour, leaving Daniel hungry for more. She didn't give him her number. She didn't promise anything. She simply placed a napkin on the bar, a faint lipstick mark on the corner, and walked out. That restraint was the real seduction. The next 48 hours were a study in Daniel's desperation. He found her on Instagram, an account we had set up with meticulous care, stocked with carefully staged photos of Izzy as her alias, Isabel Hart, a marketing consultant who loved indie films and long walks along Lake Michigan. Every detail was curated from Daniel's preferences. She posted a picture of herself with a book he had once raved about. Another of a Cubs game ticket, casually captioned. By the third day, he messaged her. By the fifth, he canceled dinner with me, claiming a late meeting at the firm. I was at Wrigley Field when I watched them together, my hat pulled low, my seat chosen carefully. Izzy leaned against him, laughing at his jokes, sipping a beer she barely touched. Daniel looked 20 years younger, his eyes alight with the thrill of his own cleverness. I sat still, my phone recording, my face blank. Every move he made, every smile he offered her, every lie he told me afterward, documented. Evidence stacked neatly in my mind like case law precedents. When Izzy returned to her loft that night, she poured herself a glass of wine and dialed me on speaker. He's falling, Elena. Fast. Good, I replied. My voice was steady, detached. Turn up the heat. She grinned through the phone, though I could hear it rather than see it. Should I push him about the ring? Yes, I said, my tone final. Make him say it out loud. Make him betray me with his own words. Silence hummed for a moment. Then Izzy's voice, low and eager. You really don't want to stop, do you? No, I whispered, my gaze fixed on the skyline beyond my office window. I want him broken. Piece by piece. The city glowed in the distance, oblivious. Inside my chest, there was no ache, no sorrow, only the sharp, clean satisfaction of a plan unfolding exactly as designed. Daniel thought he was living a double life. But in truth, he was already ensnared in mine. This is where Daniel's arrogance deepens while Elena and Izzy tighten the trap. Izzy manipulates Daniel emotionally, recording his confessions. Elena attacks from the legal side, freezing assets, hiring a PI, cloning his devices. A big discovery, Daniel's escape plan folder. Men like Daniel always believed they could compartmentalize. A wife for respectability. A mistress for ego. A career for validation. They stacked their lives like neat boxes on a shelf, convinced no one would ever notice the cracks between them. But Izzy and I were experts at slipping into those cracks. And by now, Daniel was already living two lives, his and the one we had scripted for him. Izzy deepened the affair with surgical precision. She played the perfect echo of his fantasies, vulnerable enough to confide in him, sharp enough to stroke his vanity. Over late-night drinks, she asked the kind of questions that coaxed confessions. What do you wish your wife would understand about you? Or do you ever think about walking away from it all? He answered eagerly, too eagerly, his voice low, drunken, careless. Through the mic hidden in her necklace, I listened from my office as Daniel unraveled himself one arrogant thread at a time. She doesn't see me, he murmured one night, his words slurred. She thinks I'm ordinary. But I could walk away tomorrow. New city, new life. She'd never recover. Click. Another recording saved. Exhibit B. Izzy added little touches to unsettle him, a scarf of mine left draped on her couch, the faint scent of my perfume clinging to her skin. At first, he didn't notice. Then paranoia set in. He asked her, half laughing, if she had ever been near my things. She tilted her head and lied sweetly, of course not. Meanwhile, I launched my own offensive. From the sterile calm of my law office, I treated Daniel not as a husband, but as a case. I froze our joint assets, ensuring he couldn't siphon money into his mistress's pockets. I hired a private investigator to track his movements, documenting every dinner, every hotel receipt, every arm draped around Izzy's shoulders. And then, the digital front. I brought in a specialist, an old contact from a high-profile fraud case I had prosecuted years before. For the right price, he cloned Daniel's laptop and phone, scraping every hidden file, every encrypted folder. What he delivered back to me was more damning than anything I had expected. Buried beneath layers of innocuous spreadsheets and client briefs was a folder titled simply, Escape Plan. Inside were flight itineraries to Miami, private emails to a real estate broker in Florida, and a draft separation agreement he had typed himself, one that left me stripped of assets, reputation, and power. He hadn't just planned to betray me. He had planned to erase me. The discovery did not sting, it clarified. The man I had married was not careless or merely selfish, he was calculated. And if he thought he could play that game with me, then he would finally learn what calculation looked like in the hands of someone who never lost. I sat at my desk long after midnight, reviewing each file, my pen tapping rhythmically against the mahogany surface. The city outside was hushed, lights twinkling like false promises. Inside, I felt the cold satisfaction of evidence gathered, a case prepared, a verdict inevitable. Izzy called just after 2 a.m., her voice lazy with wine and victory. He told me tonight he doesn't even feel guilty anymore. Said you'd never have the guts to leave him. I allowed myself a small laugh, low, humorless. Then he underestimates me as badly as he underestimates you. She purred, amused. He thinks he's in control, Elena. That's what makes this so delicious. He won't think that for long. There was silence for a moment, and then Izzy's voice softened, almost intimate. Do you ever feel anything? I mean, listening to him, watching him with me? Most wives would break. I considered the question. The truth was simple. No. Emotion is noise. Noise gets in the way of strategy. It was the same principle I had applied in court for years. Never show weakness, never reveal the wound. Victories weren't won on passion. They were won on precision. By the end of that week, the twin assault was in full motion. Daniel's life, once so neatly packaged, was fraying at every edge. His credit card declined at dinner, my doing. He snapped at colleagues in the office, distracted by paranoia. He confided more in Izzy, unaware she was recording every syllable. And then, the night came when Izzy asked him the question we had rehearsed for days. Why don't you wear your wedding ring? Through the mic, I heard the hesitation. The clink of ice against glass. Then his voice, firm, arrogant, final. Because I don't want to be married to her anymore. The words dropped like a gavel in my ears. Judgment rendered. Case closed. I closed my laptop, the recording safely stored in triplicate. My reflection stared back at me in the darkened window, calm, composed, unflinching. Daniel believed he was leading a double life. But what he didn't realize was that both lives belonged to me now. He was living in my courtroom. And I never let a defendant walk free. Every scheme requires a climax, the moment when a target steps willingly into their own execution. For Daniel, that moment would come under the pretense of opportunity, the one thing he could never resist. Izzy orchestrated it with her usual flair. She told him about a friend of hers, a filmmaker working on a documentary about modern relationships. The pitch was simple, couples and individuals sharing their candid thoughts on love, loyalty, and marriage. She said the project was hush-hush, invite-only, and exclusive. Exclusivity was Daniel's drug of choice. The bait was irresistible. I secured the loft myself, a space in Fulton Market we rented under a Shell LLC. High ceilings, exposed brick, industrial windows that let the city sprawl like a backdrop to our performance. We staged it with care, cameras hidden behind one-way glass, microphones embedded in the furniture, lighting arranged to flatter, but not expose. Everything looked authentic, yet every detail was controlled. When Daniel arrived, he carried himself with the smug ease of a man certain he was about to shine. He had even worn a new suit, his tie knotted too perfectly, his cufflinks catching the light. He believed he was walking into a stage where he would be admired, applauded, perhaps even discovered. He signed the consent forms without reading them. Izzy slid them across the table with a coy smile, and he scribbled his signature like a man too important for fine print. I almost laughed at the irony. He had just consented to his own destruction. I monitored from the next room, my headset tuned to every breath. Izzy's voice carried easily through the speakers. "Thank you for doing this," she began, her tone warm, inviting. "Most men aren't brave enough to be honest about their marriages." Daniel straightened, shoulders proud. "Well, honesty is important. People hide too much." The interviewer, an actor we had hired, asked the first question. "What does marriage mean to you?" Daniel smirked, glancing toward Izzy as if sharing a private joke. "Marriage is complicated. It's about appearances, really. The world thinks you're stable, successful, grounded. But behind closed doors," he shrugged, "you adapt. You find what makes you happy." Izzy leaned forward, her eyes soft with practiced admiration. "And what makes you happy, Daniel?" He chuckled, self-satisfied. "Being wanted. Feeling like I'm more than just a paycheck or a name on a firm's door." The interviewer let the silence linger, coaxing him further. "And your wife?" For a split second, I saw the mask slip. But Daniel was too enamored with his own narrative to stop. "She doesn't appreciate me. She's cold, unyielding." If she found out about all this, he waved vaguely, meaning Izzy, meaning everything, she wouldn't know what to do. She'd crumble. My jaw tightened, but my pulse stayed steady. He believed that. He truly believed I was fragile, incapable of battle. His arrogance was breathtaking. The interviewer asked about loyalty, about risk, about secrets. And Daniel, drunk on his own voice, gave them everything. He boasted about the women he could have had, how clever he was to maintain appearances, how blind I was to his duplicity. Every word was captured, every smirk immortalized. Then Izzy delivered the line we had rehearsed, soft as silk, sharp as a blade. "Do you ever think she suspects?" Daniel laughed. "Elena? She has no idea. She couldn't play this game if she tried." Izzy tilted her head, studying him. Then she leaned back, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you sure about that?" The room shifted. I could feel it through the speakers, the sudden fracture in his confidence. He looked at her differently then, suspicion flickering in his eyes. "What do you mean?" he asked. Izzy smiled, slow and chilling, her eyes catching the light in a way that mirrored mine. "Nothing. Just, sometimes people aren't as blind as they seem." He blinked, unsettled, his smirk faltering. For a moment, he searched her face, as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the wife he dismissed. The resemblance teased at the edge of his perception, but his mind rejected it. To see the truth now would mean admitting he had been a fool. And Daniel never admitted anything. The interviewer ended the session, thanking him for his candor. Izzy touched his arm lightly, reassuring, dismissing the tension with a smile. He exhaled, relieved, convinced he had performed well. But I knew better. From the next room, I replayed the recording, his words echoing back at me. "She's cold. She'd crumble. She has no idea." He believed himself the author of this narrative, the charming protagonist of his own drama. He couldn't see that he was already cast as the villain, and the script had been written without his input. When he left the loft that night, Izzy stayed behind. She closed the door, peeled off her necklace, and grinned at me through the glass. "Got him," she said simply. I nodded, calm, composed. "Yes." And now we set the stage for his final act. The trap was complete. The defendant had confessed. The only thing left was the sentencing. And I would deliver it publicly, with the entire city as jury. This is where Elena and Izzy prepare the grand stage for Daniel's public humiliation. The fake VIP charity gala. The carefully designed illusion. Daniel's overconfidence as he walks straight into their trap. Revenge is most satisfying when it masquerades as opportunity. Daniel had always been greedy for prestige, the handshakes, the flashing cameras, the illusion of belonging to Chicago's elite. It was only fitting that his destruction would come dressed as the very thing he craved most. The invitation was my masterpiece. Thick ivory cardstock, embossed with gold lettering, the kind of stationery reserved for exclusive galas and whispered about fundraisers. At the top, in bold, the Kensington Foundation, Chicago Power Couples Gala. The date was 3 weeks away, the venue listed as the Fairmont Grand Ballroom. Beneath, a discreet note, a live-streamed event to honor the city's most influential pairs. Of course, there was no Kensington Foundation. The gala was a fabrication, an elaborate stage designed for a single performance. The venue was in reality a soundstage in West Loop, rented under yet another shell corporation. The guests would be actors, hired and styled to play their parts flawlessly. The servers, the band, the photographers, all ours. Even the event's digital presence had been manufactured, a slick website, a social media page populated with months of archived photos, carefully curated to withstand the scrutiny of anyone who might investigate. When the envelope arrived on our doorstep, Daniel opened it with a mixture of curiosity and pride. He read it once, twice, his smile stretching. Elena, he called from the kitchen, holding it up like a trophy. We've been invited to the Kensington Gala. You know how impossible it is to get in? This is huge. I glanced at the card, feigning polite surprise. That's impressive. He puffed up like a peacock, his ego swelling in real time. This could be a game changer. Networking, investors, everyone will be there. I nodded, suppressing the urge to laugh. Everyone indeed. Izzy and I worked in silence over the following weeks, perfecting every detail. The seating chart, the lighting, the sound cues. The false guest list, populated with invented philanthropists and CEOs. Even the press release, crafted with language Daniel's vanity would find irresistible. Izzy, of course, would be his date. He had already begun finding excuses not to attend events with me, citing work or fatigue. It didn't matter. I wanted him to bring her. I wanted the city to see exactly who he truly was when he thought no one was watching. From my office, I drafted the script of his destruction as if preparing closing arguments for a trial. Exhibit A, the texts. Exhibit B, the receipts. Exhibit C, the audio from Izzy's necklace. Exhibit D, the video from the staged interview. Each piece a nail in the coffin of his reputation. The night of the event arrived like a storm. The soundstage glittered under chandeliers we had rented for the illusion. Velvet drapes framed the room, tables set with crystal glassware and towering floral arrangements. The air buzzed with staged conversations, laughter that belonged to actors but carried the cadence of wealth. A livestream camera panned across the room, capturing it all for the broadcast we had built, a broadcast tailored to one specific audience, Daniel's investors, partners, and colleagues. Backstage, I stood in a black gown, calm and still. My reflection stared back at me from a gilt mirror, my hair pinned flawlessly, my expression unreadable. This was not a night for tears or nerves. It was a night for execution. Izzy arrived with Daniel on her arm, and the sight nearly broke my composure, not from pain, but from the perfection of it. He looked smug, self-satisfied, utterly convinced of his own brilliance. She played her role to perfection, eyes bright with adoration, her hand resting delicately on his sleeve. They entered the ballroom as though they owned it. Daniel's gaze swept the room, cataloging the glittering guests, the cameras, the applause. He believed he had arrived at the pinnacle of his life. I watched from the wings, my heartbeat steady, my mind sharp. The host, an actor with a velvet voice, tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kensington Foundation's Gala for Chicago's power couples. Tonight, we celebrate not only success, but partnership, the bonds that elevate us to greatness. Applause echoed through the hall. Daniel straightened, his chest swelling. And now, the host continued, it is my honor to introduce a surprising addition to tonight's program, a couple whose influence cannot be overstated. Please welcome to the stage. The lights dimmed. A spotlight swept across the room. Daniel's eyes widened, eager, hungry for recognition. He leaned toward Izzy, whispering something smug, certain it was them being honored. Then the spotlight landed on me. I stepped forward, my heels clicking against the polished floor, the microphone already in my hand. Good evening, I said, my voice calm, measured, resonant through the speakers. The room stilled. The actors froze in practiced attention. Daniel's smile faltered, confusion flickering across his face. From the stage, I met his gaze directly. My lips curved into the faintest of smiles, cold, precise, victorious. Tonight, I continued, is about truth. And truth, as we all know, has a way of revealing itself, no matter how deeply it's buried. I let the silence hang, savoring it. The tension coiled tighter, the air thick with anticipation. In that moment, Daniel realized something was wrong. His expression shifted from pride to unease, a crack forming in the facade of his arrogance. He shifted in his seat, his hand tightening around his glass. I lifted the first exhibit in my mind, ready to begin the trial. The invitation had been delivered. The sentencing would begin now. The silence in the ballroom was electric, the kind that coils around your throat and forces every breath to come slower. I stood at the center of the stage, the spotlight warm on my skin, 100 pairs of eyes, manufactured or not fixed on me. I could see him clearly. Daniel, seated 3 rows back, his shoulders squared, his jaw tight. The smugness that had defined his entrance had evaporated, replaced by the first tremors of doubt. He didn't yet know what was happening, but he felt it, the shift in the air, the prickle of exposure. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my tone steady, measured, a lawyer addressing her jury. "Tonight, we celebrate power. But not all power is earned. Some is stolen. Some is abused. And some, I let my gaze fall directly on Daniel, is built on lies." A murmur rippled through the room. Daniel shifted again, glancing at Izzy, who offered him a perfectly rehearsed expression of confusion. I raised a small remote and pressed the button. The first screen lit up behind me, towering, undeniable. A blown-up text message, his words scrawled in sharp digital letters. "She's cold. She's boring. She doesn't satisfy me. You're the real prize." Gasps filled the air. Daniel's face drained of color. He leaned forward, ready to stand, but I raised a hand. "Sit," I said into the microphone, my voice cold enough to slice glass. "You wanted to be seen tonight, Daniel. You wanted to be admired. Let them admire the truth." Another button press. Receipts flashed across the screen, jewelry, hotel bookings, charges to our joint account. Each line item a betrayal, each dollar another nail in his coffin. He swallowed hard, panic flickering in his eyes. I could see the calculation, the desperate search for an escape. There was none. "Exhibit C," I said calmly, like I was back in court. The audio began to play. His voice, slurred with whiskey, dripping with arrogance. "She's pathetic. She'll never leave me. She needs me too much. I could walk tomorrow and she'd crumble." The room went still. Even the actors seemed stunned, their performances fueled now by genuine revulsion. Daniel's hand gripped the tablecloth, knuckles white. And finally, I said softly, "The confession." The video flickered to life. There he was, sitting in Izzy's loft, smug, leaning back in his chair. Izzy's voice, syrupy, coaxing, led him into the trap. "My wife doesn't appreciate me. She doesn't even know who I really am. She wouldn't know what to do if she found out." He laughed in the video, careless, arrogant. The same laugh he used when dismissing me at dinner parties, when belittling me in front of colleagues. Now it was the sound of his undoing. When the footage ended, the silence was suffocating. All eyes turned to him. Daniel sat frozen, his mouth half open, his reputation bleeding out onto the ballroom floor. I let the moment stretch. Then, with deliberate calm, I said, "Allow me to introduce my co-counsel in this matter." On cue, Izzy rose from her seat beside him. The collective gasp was almost musical. She stepped forward into the light, her face, my face, revealed to the crowd. Identical, unmistakable. Daniel's jaw dropped. He looked from me to her, then back again, realization crashing over him in waves. Betrayal. Humiliation. The horror of knowing he had been nothing more than a pawn in a game orchestrated by the woman he had so thoroughly underestimated. Izzy smiled sweetly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Surprise, darling," she whispered, loud enough for the microphones to catch. The audience roared, some with laughter, others with shock. Daniel recoiled as though burned, his body trembling, his composure shattered beyond repair. I took one final step forward. From the podium, I lifted a sleek folder and slid its contents across the stage toward him. "Your divorce papers," I announced. "Pre-signed, airtight, and effective immediately. Consider this the closing statement." He stared at the papers as if they were poison, his lips moving soundlessly. His empire, his image, his marriage, it was all collapsing in real time. And I continued, twisting the knife. "A courtesy copy of this evening's live stream has already been sent to your board of directors and primary investors. I imagine they'll find it enlightening." Daniel's face crumpled. He sank back into his chair, shoulders slumped, the fight drained out of him. For the first time in years, he was silent. Powerless. I turned back to the microphone, scanning the room, owning it. "This concludes our presentation. Thank you for your attention." The spotlight dimmed. The music swelled. And I dropped the mic onto the polished stage floor with a final, echoing crack. Behind me, Daniel's world collapsed. Ahead of me, a new one opened, crafted not from betrayal, but from control. The reckoning was complete. The night of the gala ended in chaos. Cameras went dark, actors slipped quietly out of character, and the rented chandeliers were lowered back into crates. But Daniel remained in that chair long after the last spotlight dimmed, motionless, shattered, a man stripped bare. I didn't watch him leave. I didn't need to. I had already seen the end of him play out in my mind months ago. His stumble out of that soundstage was merely the closing act. The real consequences came in the days that followed. By morning, the livestream link had gone viral. At first, it circulated through hushed group chats of executives and board members. By noon, it had leaked onto social media. By evening, blogs and local news outlets had already pieced together the story. Prominent Chicago entrepreneur exposed an elaborate sting by wife and twin sister. The footage was irresistible, his words, his arrogance, his collapse. Everyone wanted a piece of the scandal. Hashtags trended. Memes appeared. Daniel Maxwell, once the man who could command a room with his charm, was now the punchline of a citywide joke. His company, Maxwell Innovations, took the first hit. Investors panicked, stocks dipped, and within 48 hours, the board had called an emergency meeting. They voted unanimously to remove him as CEO. His name was erased from the company website before he could even pack his office. His friends, those men he used to toast whiskey with while sneering about me, distanced themselves overnight. Invitations dried up. Phones went unanswered. His mother, the one he had always claimed would side with him against anyone, released a single, blistering statement: "I am ashamed of my son's behavior. He does not represent the values of this family." I almost felt sorry for him then. Almost. Izzy and I sat in my new apartment, wine glasses in hand, watching it all unfold on a muted television screen. The news anchors spoke in measured tones about reputational fallout, financial ruin, and betrayal on a scale fit for fiction. We didn't speak for a while. We just watched, letting the satisfaction seep into the silence. Finally, Izzy smirked. "He's finished." I swirled the wine in my glass, the deep red catching the city lights beyond my window. "No," I corrected. "He's erased." We toasted to that. But revenge, I learned, is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of something else. In the weeks after Daniel's collapse, I found myself busier than ever. At my law firm, whispers turned into respect. My promotion came faster than expected, accompanied by a corner office with a view of the Chicago River. Freedom has a taste: clean, sharp, almost metallic. I savored it each time I unlocked the door to my new apartment, one he would never set foot in. Izzy, on the other hand, reveled in the spoils. She spent a month in Malibu, basking in the sun, dripping in jewelry bought with money we had legally secured during the divorce settlement. She sent me photos of herself on yachts, surrounded by admirers. But beneath her grin, I could see it. She was already restless. For Izzy, revenge was never enough. She needed a new stage, a new performance. That stage arrived sooner than either of us expected. It was a Thursday evening, and I was still in my office long after most had gone home. The city lights glimmered across the river, and my desk was littered with case files. My phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Ms. Maxwell." The voice on the other end was smooth, deliberate. A woman. Older, with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted. "My name is Victoria Kensington. I watched your little production." I leaned back in my chair, my pulse steady. And, she said, her tone edged with intrigue, "I think you and your sister may have a future beyond personal vendettas." I find myself in a similar predicament. A husband who believes he is untouchable. I would like your assistance. The corner of my mouth lifted. A new client. A new case. "Mrs. Kensington," I said coolly, "we don't take on just anyone." "Of course," she replied smoothly. "But I assure you, my resources are significant. And I am prepared to pay for discretion and results." I glanced out at the skyline, my reflection sharp in the glass. The idea settled into place almost effortlessly. Izzy and I had proven our methods once. Why not again? Why not turn vengeance into a business model? That night, I called Izzy. She picked up on the first ring. Another one, she asked, without preamble. Yes, I said. And this time, it won't just be a game. It will be a company. A service. A brand. There was a pause, then the sound of her laughter, rich and eager. I knew you'd come around. The fallout of Daniel's ruin wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the birth of something sharper, stronger. We had tasted victory, and now the world was beginning to demand it from us. I closed the curtains against the night and sat back at my desk, a new fire building inside me. Daniel had been the first. But he would not be the last. Revenge burns hot, but legacy burns colder and lasts longer. The weeks following Victoria Kensington's call unfolded with the precision of a new case file. Izzy and I met her in a private suite at the Four Seasons, the kind of place dripping with wealth and guarded by silence. She arrived in diamonds, her smile brittle, her eyes carrying the sharp glint of humiliation. I recognized it instantly. I had lived it. Her husband had built his fortune in real estate, parading mistresses through penthouses while she smiled for cameras. He believed himself untouchable, shielded by money, secrecy, and arrogance. Sound familiar? As Victoria poured out her story, Izzy listened with predatory patience, her head tilted, her hand resting lightly against her glass of champagne. I took notes, every detail catalogued, every pattern of deceit highlighted like evidence. When she finished, she leaned forward. Can you do to him what you did to Daniel? Izzy's smile was feline. We can do better. And that was the moment it was born. We called it the Twin Gambit Group. A discreet, bespoke service designed not for chaos but for precision. Our mission: expose betrayal, dismantle arrogance, and rebrand offenders as the cautionary tales they deserve to be. The roles were obvious. I was the strategist, the one who knew how to turn raw evidence into a narrative that no one could escape. The courtroom had trained me well, and my new office overlooked the Chicago skyline like a fortress of glass and steel. Izzy was the infiltrator, the siren who could slip into any man's blind spot, reflect back his fantasies, and lead him into the snare. Together, we were a closed circuit. Indistinguishable, interchangeable, and unstoppable. We built rules into our work. Rule 1. We only take cases where the truth is undeniable. Rule 2. We operate in shadows. No publicity, no paper trail, no witnesses outside those we control. Rule 3. We win. Always. Izzy loved the theatrics, the disguises, the seductions, the whispered confessions caught on tape. I loved the precision, the contracts, the airtight settlements, the ironclad leverage. Where I saw structures, she saw games. Together, we created an empire out of ashes. Our first official case was Victoria's. Watching her transformation was like watching myself in reverse. At first, she trembled at the thought of confronting him, afraid of what it would cost. But by the end, she was smiling cold, sharp, satisfied, as we delivered the final blow at a staged anniversary dinner where her husband's mistress walked in on cue, followed by the press we had arranged. The fallout was spectacular. Victoria left her marriage not as a victim, but as a victor. And she paid us handsomely for it. Word spread, but only in whispers. We became the ghost story of Chicago's wealthy elite, the sisters you called when your world was collapsing and you wanted the ruins to bury someone else instead of you. We never advertised. We didn't need to. Our reputation traveled in boardrooms and penthouses, in hushed voices over martinis. One night, weeks later, I stood in my office, the city stretching beneath me like a map of power. The river glistened with reflected lights, and the sound of traffic rose like a distant heartbeat. Izzy sprawled on the leather couch, scrolling through her phone, already flirting with the possibility of our next client. "Do you ever think about Daniel?" she asked suddenly, her tone casual, almost bored. I didn't look at her. I kept my gaze fixed on the skyline. Not really. Not even a little? I allowed myself the smallest smile. Daniel was the trial run. The blueprint. Nothing more. Silence hung between us for a beat, then she laughed low, dangerous, thrilled. The truth was, I didn't need to think about Daniel anymore. His downfall was immortalized, etched into the digital ether, replayed endlessly by those who relished seeing the mighty fall. My legacy was no longer tied to him. It was tied to what came after. I touched the glass of my window, the cold seeping into my fingertips. In the reflection, I saw myself, sharp lines, sharper eyes. A woman no longer defined by betrayal, but by control. By choice. By power. My name is Elena, I whispered softly to my reflection, though not for the audience, not for anyone else. Just for me. And this? This was only the beginning. The city belonged to those who could play the game and win. And no one played it better than us.